Welcome back, everyone. Sorry about my delay for my video. I was out of town, but today we are going to go over the more advanced tips and tricks for drafting. If you missed my last video about what is a draft and how to do it, check it out. The link is in the description below. This video will be on the longer side, so please use the timestamps, which is something I really encourage for this video, as some parts may be more of help than others. I am first going to talk about game methodology and then move into draft tips that you can try out yourself in your next draft. So please click to the parts you're interested in, or just sit back, relax, and enjoy the whole thing. So I've been drafting TCGs for many years now, and the number one thing to keep in mind is either having a game plan or finding that win condition. A game plan is something that develops over the draft and helps you make better decisions about your picks. Game plans can include being aggressive, controlling, or having a well rounded mid range plan. In Star Wars Unlimited, it can also include having a more ground or space unit focus. Being aggressive means taking more low curve cards, while being controlling means taking survival tools and more high costed cards. Controlling the skies is also a very legitimate draft strategy that can lead to a lot of wins if you guys have played Magic. Personally, I tend to go in with the idea of being well rounded with the mid range plan. Since this is the case, I am always looking for win conditions. A win condition is usually a powerful unit that is very hard for your opponent to deal with. A great example of this is the difference between the 4-5 unit Wampa and the 6-9 unit Reinforcement Walker. Wampa is a very good statted unit, while Reinforcement Walker has okay stats, but has this insane effect that can help you close out the game. If I were ever between these two units, I would be taking the Reinforcement Walker. The Reinforcement Walker heals you, draws cards, and having 9 defense makes it really hard to kill. Plain and simple, the Walker can win the game on its own. While it does cost 8, draft games tend to go a bit longer. I'm always looking for cards that can win me the game in the later turns over very solid mid-game cards. You can further this logic to powerful cards, like the 3-5 Boba unit. If I was offered Boba unit and the Reinforcement Walker, I would still be choosing the Walker early on because the Walker helps me close out a game. While we all wanted to take the Boba because we would like $50 more in our pocket, if this was at the most competitive level, I would always lean towards the late game cards at the start of a draft. For some anecdotal evidence, I was playing a pre-release where my opponent opened 2 Boba units. In response, I just played on curve units, and I did lose a bit of control of the board in the mid game. However, he did not have any late game cards. I played 97th Legion on 7 resources and a Palpatine on 8 resources. He just didn't have an answer to my big threats. He can only play more small units, which ultimately lost him the game. This is not me saying to not take Boba, but to make sure that your deck has these late game tools. As if he had Boba and late game tools, right? That's even better. But that would have been very greedy, especially in a draft scenario where you can get all these great mid game cards and all these great late game cards. Um, Also, please remember this is not how you should always draft. This is just one strategy when you go into drafts, which again is finding and prioritizing cards that can win games on their own, which is my personal go to when drafting. But let's talk about some other different game plans you can have. An aggressive game plan is just how it sounds. You should look to prioritize early game units and strong stats. Pick attack values over defense values when given the option. For example, pick the 3-2 units over the 2-3 units. Your curve, the cards that you play on curve, is a 2-drop on 2 resources, a 3-drop on 3 resources. It should go up to whenever you can deploy your leader. So let's say you have the leader Leia, then you shouldn't have anything in your deck that costs more than 5 since she deploys on 5. Of course, there are exceptions to this and everything that I say, but this is the general rule. Make sure that you focus your picks on 2 and 3 cost units. Having turn 1 and 2 plays are the most important in aggressive decks, especially since there are many buff cards in this set, such as Wing Leader. If you have lots of 2-drops, that also give you the option of playing 2 cards on 4 resources to go wide and overwhelm your opponent. 1-drops in this game do not feel like true 1-drops since we start on 2 resources, but you should look for the ones that have aggressive stat lines, such as the 3 ones, Greedo and Death Star Stormtrooper. In an aggressive game plan, you really want to look for more win condition type cards, such as For a Cause I Believe in and Surprise Strike. Events that deal damage out of nowhere are a great way to close out games and crucial for winning with an aggressive deck. So notice how these two cards are very different than the Reinforcement Walker, but that really depends on my game plan, right? In a mid-range game plan, I need to make sure I have some sort of top end, and this is the quote unquote top end in an aggressive deck to help me close out the game. You should also look to play a 25 HP base, as it pretty much gives you a free extra ability with no downside since you are planning on being the aggressive one. Aggressive strategies can be successful and can really punish players like me who are always looking for expensive game win closers. Well, I already talked a lot about the mid-range game plan, but this is when you focus on having a variety of different units, but making sure to grab those units that can end games. Stats are going to be your friend in a mid-range plan. You really want to be playing on curve for the whole game with the correct stats on each turn. So what are correct stats? The correct stats are always +1/1 more than the turn before, starting at 2/3 or 3/2 on turn 1. So 2/3 or 3/2, those numbers add up to 5. So on turn 2, the stats should add up to 7. On turn 3, they should add up to 9, and so on. This is a really easy way to evaluate what generic good cards are, and I used it before in my videos, and it led to lots of good pre-release success just based on looking for cards with good stats. Obviously, effects and keywords like ambush are important, but we should really be focusing on playing the correct stats throughout the game to make it harder for our opponents to trade with us. If you do this and your opponent does not, it becomes very easy to get ahead, even without any crazy card effects. Ambush is also your friend, though, when playing mid-range because it can help you 2-for-1 your opponent. A 2-for-1 is exactly how it sounds. I used one card to trade with two of your cards. Mid-range looks for incremental value as the game goes on, so correct stats and 2-for-1s are key, as well as having that late game closer. I would avoid playing upgrades in the mid-range plan, as this opens you up to getting 2-for-1s, and upgrades are usually below the desired stats. If you put an upgrade on a creature and they choose to kill that creature, well, you got 2-for-1s. I will add that there are almost no cards with correct stats starting with 7 resources in this game. So at 7 resources and above, you should be looking for impactful effects that can help you 2-for-1 or stabilize your life immediately. Finally, you could have the game plan of control. While control also cares about having good stats, it cares much more about having strong events that remove units on the field. Control wants to defeat units as quickly and as efficiently as possible. Uh, Sorry. Control cards want to defeat units as quickly and efficiently as possible in order to survive the late game to play threat after threat. The main difference between mid-range and control is mid-range tries to dominate the board with their unit stats, and control tries to dominate the board with their events. Cards such as Super Laser Blast and Bombing Run and Power of the Dark Side are great examples of control cards. Bombing Run and Super Laser Blast really stand out, as I think these are very bad mid-range cards, as you don't want to be killing your own stuff, but fantastic control cards, as they tend to have less early game units. Control also wants a bit more late game finishers than mid-range. To give it a number, I would say Control wants about 5 to 6 cards that cost 7 or more, while mid-range wants 3 to 4. While some may argue for different numbers, neither mid-range or control will consistently win without having some amount of late-game finishers, and control definitely wants more than mid-range. There are other types of themed game plans, like trying to overwhelm your opponent with mostly space units, but I'm not going to go into that in this video. Alright, well, I talked a lot about the types of decks that you can focus on while drafting, but this is just everything that I think about when drafting, so I thought it'd be relevant. But let's now move on to more explicitly draft-related topics and tips. First, let's discuss the idea of forcing versus staying open. In a Star Wars Unlimited draft, you will have the choice of 3 leaders to play. Before ever seeing the cards in your pack, you can make the decision to force one of your leaders. This means that no matter what, you are going to play that leader, i.e., play that color or aspect. At this point, you can also decide to force your second color, though I would decide what second color to force somewhere during pack 1. You don't need to do that right away. So what are the benefits and consequences to forcing a color or color combo? The number one benefit of forcing is that you will not have any wasted picks in the beginning of the draft, meaning cards that you can't shouldn't play. You will also pick the best cards for your color given your options. An example of this is when your pack has two very strong picks in it of different colors. You picked the yellow card, but in the end your deck was red-green. If you had the plan of forcing yellow from the start, then you would not have lost out on playing a strong card. Forcing a color also sends very strong signals to those next to you, which I will talk about more in depth in the next section of this video. There are some downsides to forcing, however. If lots of people at your table are picking the color you are forcing, then you will not see much of the color you want. This can send some people into panic mode, causing them to completely change colors. However, true forcers should not change their color. They should hold strong. This is especially true in Star Wars Unlimited, as you have the choice of playing any color base you want at the end of the draft. So if you make the decision to force one color, you could stay open for your second color and just see what there is a lot of in the packs. This leads into the second choice and the idea of staying open. Staying open refers to the idea of trying to pick more generic cards that fit into many of your leader choices, even if that card is not necessarily the strongest card of the pack. Staying open provides more flexibility in your draft experience and usually ensures that your deck has 30 playable cards. You read what colors are not being picked in packs, and then you start taking said color. There are truly generic cards in this game, like the 2/3 Underworld Guy and the 3/5 Ambush unit if you control a vehicle, both of which are fine cards to play, and there are single aspect cards that could open to your leaders. For example, you might have drafted 3 villain leaders, so the single aspect villain cards are completely open to you, and you should prioritize those cards if you're ever trying to stay open. Staying open is not something that you do for the whole draft, but it can go as far as the beginning of the second pack. The sooner you get the read of what aspects are open, the better your deck will be. The benefits of being open is that you get to have the bottom up approach of picking the best leader for your selection of cards. You will also have a greater chance of being past really strong cards later into the packs since you are playing a more open aspect idea. Overall, staying open helps you be more flexible. The number one downside to staying open is that it is much harder than forcing is in draft. This is especially true in draft environments where you cannot look at your past picks until the end of a pack. Remembering what you have taken can be hard while also trying to think about everything else that is going on. It can also be hard to read signals, especially for newer players, and again, I will talk about signaling next. Forcing also has a high roll that staying open does not, which can lead to the player having the highest ceiling for their deck. The forcing strategy also has the lowest floor, though. Overall, staying open leads to a more consistent draft experience, but it can be difficult to do, especially for newer drafters. Now, you have heard me say signaling a few times, so let's talk about it and how to implement it in your next draft. The idea of signaling is when you are trying to talk to the table through your actions, especially the people to your left and to your right. As a drafter, you can also receive signals from those around you and adjust your draft plan in accordance. A very simple signal you can do is where you try to get all 3 of your leaders to share a single aspect. If you do this, you have now signaled to everyone else that there is a guarantee that you will be taking said aspect from packs, and therefore you are sending the signal that there will be less of that aspect available. This can reasonably cause others to completely avoid that aspect, meaning more quality cards for you. This means that once all 3 leaders are drafted, you should be asking yourself what aspects are more likely to be taken by those next to me so that I can give myself a better chance of getting more quality cards. It is also important to note that the people directly next to you are the most important people at the table. You will not be playing them in the first round if they do it correctly, and if you avoid their aspects, they'll be passing you the best card in the pack in your aspect, which is pretty cool. Another way to send signals is by what is left in the pack once you pass it. If the person next to you has an open pool of leaders and you want to nudge them, just give them a little nudge towards a direction, you can leave a very powerful card in the pack and choose to play other aspects. Let's say the person to your left has two heroic leaders and one villain leader. Their villain leader is by far their strongest choice and happens to be the leader Boba Fett. In your pack, you get a Fett's Fire Spray. Now, you also have Boba Leader in front of you, but you choose to pass the Fire Spray and take something else. If this is early enough in the draft, the person next to you is incredibly likely to take the Fire Spray. You're pretty much telling them, hey, play Boba, right? It effectively means that you signal to the person left of you that you are not going to play Boba and probably not yell at all since you just passed such a strong card. This is a way for you to help out yourself because you gained information about others from an action that you took. It can be done with many different cards, and it is something that you should try to practice when at the draft table, as it can be a very strong strategy for making a solid deck. Though, that being said, when you see a Fett's Fire Spray, you can also choose to just force Boba from there on out, right? But we're talking about sending signals. So while sending signals is important, receiving them is crucial because drafters are always sending them whether they are aware or not. Notice which strong cards are left in packs and try to make reasonable assumptions about which leader the drafters next to you are not going to be playing. If you have the game plan of staying open for the draft, you can gain a ton of information about what is still in the pack. You may also notice a color is completely missing or very scarce from pack to pack. This is another signal to stay away from that aspect. I will say that Star Wars Unlimited packs are very random and can contain a lot of a certain aspect to begin with, so do be careful with how early you make that decision. It is probably easier to receive the signals from what is still left in the pack instead of what is not. You will learn more about sending and receiving signals the more you draft, as long as you're actively thinking about it during and reflecting on it afterwards, which I would do for your games. Always think about different decisions you could have taken and how that would affect those around you. The last draft tip I will leave you with is to make sure you pay attention to synergies. While Wing Leader and its Imperial counterpart are great cards, they do nothing if you do not have the units to support them. There are many cards that want you to have the Rebel, Imperial, Force, and Vehicle traits. Consider this when you are taking your cards. During the draft review, which is the time in between drafting packs, take the time to count up how many of each you have. Does your deck want cards like Force Throw or a Lightsaber? I think a lot of people will take these trait payoff cards without really realizing they don't have much support for them in their pool. Then in the last pack, they're scrambling, trying to find as many pieces as they can. And that will impair their ability to make better decisions about what their deck really needs. Also, you do not need to build around rebels for a single wing leader. Having a good amount of payoffs and units in the same trait is crucial if you want to go about drafting these type of cards. I also want to know if you really like playing around synergies, then forcing is probably the move for you. Just be careful as it is even riskier to force traits since you are narrowing the field of your potential picks. Whew. And we made it to the end. This is definitely not everything, but it should give you lots to think about for your next draft. My advice would be to pick one thing to focus on. Do you want to stay open or force? Do you want to practice sending signals or concentrate on receiving signals? What kind of game plan are you going to run for your deck? Once you feel comfortable, then keep adding more strategies to your repertoire. Also, guys, this was my first fully scripted video. I am literally reading this off my screen. If you like this type of format, let me know in the comments below. If you like it when I freestyle more, which I feel much more comfortable doing, leave a comment so I can see the interest. Sorry if my eyes were in a weird spot. Again, this is my first time doing a script, but I wanted to try it out as I was given the advice to try it out. So here it is. Um, and I can also always make another video in the future exploring the draft format more, or if you guys liked the idea of signaling and you just want to hear me talk about signaling some more, I do have more to say on both topics. But yeah, That's all I got, guys. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, peace.